Okay, so everyone, we want to welcome you and open the space by taking a moment to acknowledge that we live and work on stolen land, which is the traditional home of the Stechos people, who have been in relationship with and who have been caring for and being cared for by this land since time immemorial. We honor the tribes of the Medicine Creek Treaty and understand that the agreements of the treaty have been severely broken. We recognize the sovereignty of the tribes who are still present on reservation land in the Olympia area, such as the Squaxin, Nisqually, Chehalis, and Puyallup tribes. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to other Indigenous people present today. We hope this never surrendered, occupied territory will be returned to its rightful stewards. My name is Sarah Lloyd. I'm the Principal Disruptor at Soul on Fire Consulting, and I will be moderating today's forum. So welcome. On behalf of the 19 nonprofit organizations who signed onto the Racial Justice Priorities Letter, dated March 1st, 2021, named in alphabetical order as follows: Cielo, Community Youth Services, Enterprise for Equity, Family Support Center of South Sound, Grub, Hockey Farmers Collective, Homes First, Interfaith Works, Olympia Film Society, Pierce County AIDS Foundation, Pizza Clutch, Power, Sidewalk, Tamber Donahue, the Director of Monarch Children's Justice and Advocacy Center, the Bridge Music Project, Thurston Asset Building Coalition, Thurston Climate Action Team, Together, and YWCA of Olympia. I would like to welcome you on behalf of all of those organizations to the second of two scheduled nonprofit community forums. Today's forum is focused on safety, housing, and food security. So to frame the forum a little bit, the nonprofits that signed onto this letter recognize the racial justice and policy priorities elevated by communities of color for years have largely been ignored, and we felt it was important to further amplify their voices in our community. Our nonprofit community recognizes the intersecting and compounding nature of systemic violence. The organizations that came together to sign this letter and amplify these policy priorities might not all be focused on policing, the criminal legal system, or traditional notions of safety. However, we recognize that all our missions and programming contribute to creating true health and safety for everyone, including our most vulnerable. In looking to address the mental health outcomes of the disproportionate exposure to state-sanctioned violence towards people of color, many of whom are poor, the forum organizers would like to present the following excerpt from Dr. DeWilder, Dr. Fedina, and Dr. Link. These doctors theorize that 8 factors cause police violence to be so impactful for mental health outcomes. Number 1, police violence is state sanctioned. Number 2, police are pervasive presence. 3, there are limited resources for recourse. 4, police culture deters internal accountability. 5, police violence alters deeply held beliefs. 6, the disproportionate exposure towards people of color, many of which are poor, can underscore a sense of diminished value within U.S. racial and class hierarchies. 7, police violence is stigmatizing. And 8, police are typically armed. We are asking you to engage in this process to recognize the creation and preservation of safety is broader than a police response. Safety is created by equitable access to resources, housing, stability, a sense of belonging in the community, and meaningful access to justice. For all these reasons, we want to hear from you about a broad set of policy priorities related to health and safety, including shifting money from our criminal legal system, including the courts and school resource officers, to broader community resources. We also want to hear from you on how you plan to address the presence of ICE and organized white supremacist groups in our community. Thank you so much for showing up to participate in this important work. All of the elected officials in Thurston County, as well as some city officials as well. They were sent this letter and were invited, and we wanted to commend you for choosing to participate in this crucial dialogue. So with that, we have our panel, and if you all can introduce yourself one at a time, you have 30 seconds to make that introduction.
I guess I'll go first. My name is Mayor Andy Ryder from the city of Lacey. I was born and raised in Lacey, and I've been on the council for going on 12 years and the past almost 8 years as the mayor of Lacey. I'm also very active on the National League of Cities. I'm on their board of directors and also one of the founding members of the Real Council, the Race Equity and Leadership Council for the National League of Cities. And I've been the board liaison to that council for the past 3 years.
Thank you, Mayor Ryder.
I want to point out that Councilmember Miller has joined us. So
Thank you.
Malcolm, do you want to introduce yourself or?
Sure. I am Malcolm Miller. I am on the Lacey City Council. I don't have as long a record as Andy does. I do a lot of different things, but none that I can think of sharing with you guys. So, but feel free to ask.
Thank you, Councilman Miller.
Malcolm. And I'm Carolyn Cox. I'm in my 4th year now on the Lacey City Council. And in addition, well, in my council work, I've put my focus primarily on homelessness, on transportation, particularly intercity transit, and was part of that key decision to go to zero fare system. This is a 5-year project that I think has been a real game changer for people. I also have served on the Community Action Council. I'm active on the Thurston Thrives project. I'm on the executive committee and the housing action team, and we're doing some pretty critical work on race there. And I serve on the board of Interfaith Works.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I guess I will go next. I am not an elected official. I am an administrator. So thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. My name is Romero Chavez. I am the Thurston County Manager. And I have been serving this position for just about 4.5 years. It has been quite an experience. Main responsibility is to oversee all the departments within the Thurston County and coordinate the operations and in particular the budget with all the elected offices that we have in place. The county has close to 1,100 employees, and we provide many services to the community. So you can see I have an accent, originally from South America, but I've been a resident of Thurston County for 32 years. So I love this community. I have been involved in this community for many years. And the position that I hold has given me the opportunity to do something beyond myself. So great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So here's an overview of the evening and what to expect. This evening's forum will be recorded and will be made available to the public. To begin, each official will be asked a series of, so we have a series of questions we'll ask each official. Each official will have 2.5 minutes to respond. And after that time, we will move on to the next question. The officials received the initial questions yesterday, but not the follow-up questions.
Oops, you muted yourself.
Sarah, you're accidentally muted.
That's so amazing. You're welcome.
Oh, we lost you at the The officials received the questions yesterday, but not the follow-up questions.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I'll read each question twice, and then I'll call on officials one at a time. The order that you respond will stay the same, but who starts will rotate. I will signal you when you have 15 seconds remaining, and then say thank you when time is up and ask that you wrap up your thought quickly. Though there's great value in discussion, for our purposes this evening, officials will not be engaged in discussion with participants or with each other. Thank you all for your participation in today's forum, and let's start. So our first panelist will be Mayor Ryder. And the first question is, historically and currently, areas of farm ownership, food access, farm management and services, and food production are filtered through the lens of white supremacy to the exclusion of BIPOC people. How are you as an elected official going to ensure equitable access to BIPOC people at the decision-making tables on land use and regulation? So again, historically and currently, areas of farm ownership, food access, farm management and services, and food production are filtered through the lens of white supremacy to the exclusion of BIPOC people. How are you as an elected official or city manager going to ensure equitable access to BIPOC people at the decision-making tables on land use and regulation? So Mayor Ryder.
Well, thank you for the question. And since I'm the mayor of the city of Lacey, I'm going to really focus more on the land use and regulation side of things. And I absolutely agree. This needs to be addressed, which is why, over about 6 years ago, I started really putting a lot of effort into racial equity and equity in general through my work with the National League of Cities and the Race Equity and Leadership Council. From that council, I realized one of the first things that we needed to do was hear from that community. And local government traditionally has done a really poor job, as you pointed out, on communicating and understanding the needs and access and everything else. And so I pulled together a group which we call the Civic Leaders group, but it was really a broad group of people within our community to just start the conversation on what the city needed to do. I'm really happy to say that just very recently, the city council did pass ordinance 1581, which created our commission on equity, which is going to do exactly what we're hoping to do, is have an advisory board to advise the city council on land use decisions and regulations, everything from our comprehensive plan to our transportation comprehensive plan. And so that will give us the mechanism to advise our council when it comes to policy decisions. And we're at we've been through this process so far, and we've started quite a while ago with getting our community engaged, and so we're really excited about this next steps of the Commission on Equity.
Thank you. Councilman Miller.
Okay. Man, that's an interesting question because, as somebody who's at the decision-making table, how can I be sure that the BIPOC community is infused into farming and into agricultural production? Is that what you're asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Is that about right?
Yeah.
A lot of times when policies are made, it seems like they kind of grandfather in those who have already been there for long periods of time and make sure that they get to stay. And we have to do our part to recognize and when those kinds of policies are being made and to speak up in those times. And because if if we continue to let the policies be made without the types of groups that have been created in the city of Lacey to ensure equity, then those policies will continue to be made by people and through channels that, aren't really considering, any kind of emerging market, anybody else who could possibly want to get involved. So I would first want to make sure that, when those policies are being made and those things are being done, that they pass through the kind of commission that's been created in the city of Lacey. I think this is going to be a template for something, that the county could also use as well. And I hope they do take a look at what we've done and say, you know what, we could use that here as well at the county level so that nobody gets left out, because we all know that for generations, BIPOC people have been left out of a lot of those types of decisions and those types of opportunities. So I would want to make sure that, at least, the commission on equity is at the table when those things are being, decided on.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you all for having us tonight. And I hope some of these questions are pretty daunting. I'm going to do the best I can. But I think more importantly, I want to speak from the heart. And our gifted council member, Miller, has demonstrated a great ability to do that as well. So I hope he gets to take advantage of his time here. In terms of seat at the table, I think we've talked a little bit about this Commission on Equity that we're starting up, and I have very high hopes for that. And Council Miller and several of us on the council were adamant that the people who have been working on this commission in the background, who are all BIPOC, be the ones who get to select the members of this commission to ensure that we are hearing from underrepresented groups and their voices are at the table. So that's one pathway in. Another pathway in is our planning commission, and I would really like to see more diversity on it than we have, but I think it is citizens who are advising the city council on land use and zoning decisions and the like. And I really see Lacey starting to make a really big sea change on looking at things like zoning, land use, and basically every other thing that we do as a city through a racial equity lens. I really commend Mayor Ryder. He's put a lot of thought and a lot of work in the background into making this commission take off, and I see a lot of hope. One other point I'm not sure everybody quite realizes that Lacey is the most diverse of our cities, and I'm probably nearing my time, but we can share some numbers with you on the makeup of that. Okay. 74% white, 11.2%. I'm sorry, it's all blue. I'm not going to be able to get that. All right.
Okay, and County Manager Chavez.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for this opportunity. So let me first of all addressing from the process as to how we go through in making decisions related to the land use and regulation. What we call is the comp plan amendment. As Mayor Ryder alluded to, the fact that it's a process, and in fact this is very timely to address this question because the Board of County Commissioners just adopted what we call is the docket. It's all the elements that we're going to be working in the upcoming year related to land use and regulation. So included in that docket is the revisions to the agricultural chapter of the Thurston County Comprehensive Plan. So, and the intent of this process is really public engagement. when a process goes through in any comp plan amendments and regulations, it takes a long time. And it takes a long time just to make sure the public has the opportunity to provide their perspective before it comes to the Board of County Commissioners to make an informed decision. So it's lengthy, is in a way cumbersome, but we welcome just about every single comment that we can get. Now, on the parallel track, similar to the city of Lacey, back in mid-90s, the county used to have a cultural diversity and human rights council. And it just happened that I served for 6 years in that council as appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. That council, for one reason or another, stopped operating. So I'm taking that council and revamping that to a racial equity council, in which the representation of the BIPOC community will be at the table. And I do believe between those two parallel tracks, the public process of the land use regulation and the racial equity council is going to create many intersections just to make sure that we hear all the voices associated with those decisions related to land use.
Thank you. Okay, so as a follow-up to question number 1, BIPOC farmers, especially Black farmers, are regularly targets of harassment and violence, which impedes the operation of existing farms and discourages individuals from pursuing opportunities in agriculture. What are you going to do to ensure that as numbers of BIPOC farmers start to rise in our urban and rural areas, they are protected from harassment, hate speech, and harmful attacks? So again, BIPOC farmers, especially Black farmers, are regularly targets of harassment and violence, which impedes the operation of existing farms and discourages individuals from pursuing opportunities in agriculture. What are you going to do to ensure that as numbers of BIPOC farmers start to rise in our urban and rural areas, they are protected from harassment, hate speech, and harmful attacks? Mayor Ryder?
Well, first of all, I think food insecurity is a really big issue for the city of Lacey and for Thurston County. And we definitely need a program to support our farmers. And I know the county is doing some good work on this, and even in the city of Lacey, we've looked at some of our regulations to allow some urban farming. But in general, you always have to have intention when you're trying to change historic habits, right? And so in this case, I really think we need a program, a plan to support our farmers in our schools and make it a path forward that a lot of people might not think about, and especially in Lacey and North Thurston Public Schools, which is by far the most diverse population, BIPOC population in the county. We need to be talking about farming and show it as a path forward. And then we have to have almost a zero tolerance when it comes to that hate in our communities. And it starts by the making sure that the public knows that this is an important matter, and that your elected officials aren't just sitting back and doing business as usual. And I'm really proud of the fact that Lacey has really been leading on this issue, and the council's been very, very supportive of the work that we've done in this arena. And so again, it's really about being intentional. It's about it's about planning, and it's about supporting, and then when there are injustices, pointing them out and being intentional that's not acceptable.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
Man, that's a tough question. How do we protect BIPOC farmers from hate? Which, I mean, that question can go back, what, a couple hundred years at least? How do we do that? Man, first of all, as a council, I would want to reach out to them and say, if you have any problems whatsoever, come and talk to me, because they're not going to have the reach that we have. Like Mayor Ryder said, we got to have a zero tolerance policy on hate of people who are just trying to make a living and feed other people. I would definitely say, reaching out to them and know that they have an advocate, not only, at our level, but at the county level, at the state level, so that they can, feel safe in the least, but also, pass on to the next generation. If if I was a kid growing up on a farm and I knew that, we were being hated on or harassed just because we were Black or Native or Latino or Asian or whatever, why would I want to continue that? Why would I want to pick up and just carry on with something that could get me killed? It wouldn't make any sense. So, somehow we have to create a safety net for these people, a safe environment for these people, and make sure that they're not afraid to come and tell us what's really happening. Because without that, we can't. There's nothing we can do. We all know that a lot of crime or harassment goes unreported. And in a situation like this, we can't have anything unreported. We have to make sure that they know that they can come talk to us at all times about all things. And that's, it's hard to police something that you don't know is happening. That would be step one.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox?
Well, trying not to be too duplicative of what Andy and Malcolm have said, as leaders, I think it's incumbent upon us to make it very clear to the community that harassment, violence, hate speech are not going to be tolerated, period. And that's toward farmers and it's toward anybody else. I mean, we just had an incident in North Thurston School District with a Black student union meeting where they got Zoom bombed and some hate speech was tossed into the meeting. And it was a very traumatic situation. And so going back, to what the mayor said, starting with, teaching kids early about this, I think it's really important, because obviously some kids aren't getting the message. We also have to create a safe environment for people to be willing to report these kinds of incidences, whether it's the person experiencing the hate speech, the violence, the harassment, or somebody who notices it and chooses to report it. And I think as leaders, again, we need to make it very clear that there is an open door, and do the community outreach work that's needed to let people know that we do support them and we want to hear when there are problems. I mean, it's a really tough thing to try to enforce with police. I mean, it's just, you're talking about such a small subset of the population to begin with, and you have to, what the laws that they have to work with are also pretty limited. So I think it's more about the city council using its influence and outreach to the community, and whatever we have to do, if we catch somebody at it, prosecute them however we can, hold them up for public shaming if nothing else. But it's just not going to be tolerated.
Okay, County Manager Chavez.
Yeah, let me begin answering this question on what the county has done in the past to support farmers. The county has taken a very direct action to support our farmers. We have developed a bountiful byway just to specifically support those farmers as to how we can connect it to actual business and business enterprises. And when we received some of the coronavirus relief fund last year, we made sure that we allocated particular aid to farmers who were in need and affected by the pandemic. And we'll continue to look as to where but specifically addressing your question, and similar to the answer that I provided to the previous questions, I believe the agricultural chapter, they're going to be under review with the intersection of the Racial Equity Council that we're planning to do is going to create those intersections. And for me, will be an opportunity to understand those barriers, what I call structural barriers. And within the structure, understanding the structural barriers, it will give us the opportunity to codify, to put into the county code as to how we can eliminate all of those barriers that we perceive from the BIPOC community. Related to the harassment, as Commissioner Cox, I don't think anybody in this Zoom is acceptable for any type of harassment. Nobody can accept any type of harassment to anybody. And I will be the first one and stand tall to say I will not be accepting any type of harassment of any kind to anybody. So that is unacceptable no matter what. We're going to be continue doing the business of the county. So that's probably my response to that question.
Thank you. So the next question, Councilperson Miller, you'll start first. The American Rescue Plan included $4 billion for USDA to assist socially disadvantaged farmers. These USDA funds are expected to help provide justice for long-term discrimination against Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and Native American farmers. What's your plan to ensure that these funds are used as intended? So again, the American Rescue Plan included $4 billion for USDA to assist socially disadvantaged farmers. These USDA funds are expected to help provide justice for long-term discrimination against Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and Native American farmers. What's your plan to ensure that these funds are used as intended? So Councilperson Miller.
Well, as a city council person, I don't have a lot of sway in how these funds are distributed or used. I would have to defer to our relationships that are overseeing the use of these funds. And maybe if that's the case, I could be part of the decision making or in those conversations on how these types of things are going to go and how we're going to ensure that the right people get the funds. So I would have to work through my network and relationships to be part of conversations that as at the city level that I'm not gonna be able to get a part of. That's as far forward on it as I can go at this point.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox.
Cities really don't have a hand in that funding. It typically comes from the federal government into either the county or the state and then flows into the county. And so we can turn to Mr. Chavez and say, you better use those funds the right way. And there is an accountability process built into the way they are used. But Lacey itself, there is doing a number of things on the front of food insecurity. I can touch lightly on a couple. I think the most prominent example is our Lacey Food Bank, which is a 3-part process. 2 parts are already underway, and the pantry is actually supposed to open this summer. So this is a project that Lacey invested very heavily in, and it has a garden, a large garden on site, and we are in partnership with Grub, which has a wonderful program that employs veterans, and it's a therapeutic gardening program. So lots of good happens that way. And then there is a farm stand where produce from the garden comes out and helps feed the community. And then the pantry itself, which will be opening this summer. And in the interim, particularly during the COVID crisis, we've arranged for the food bank to be able to have space on the St. Martin's campus and a couple of other places where people can come and pick up food as well. We've also supported the the lunch program during the summer in making space for that in our parks and other places. And I don't want to take up all the space because I know the mayor probably has some things he wants to say about our other efforts as well. But I think food insecurity is something that we have been taking very seriously and trying to make sure that we can do as much as we can appropriately do. Any, pass-through money that we
15 seconds.
get, like community development block grants, we can use those funds and have to support the food bank and other programs.
Thank you. County Manager Chavez.
So let me answer this question from a little more technical, and hopefully that is helpful to answer this question. So first of all, I am not aware the county is going to have a direct allocation from the USDA out of the $4 billion. But let's assume if we do. When we do any type of federal allocation, as Councilmember Cox stated, there's a lot of strings attached. What I call is there is specific criteria that we need to meet in order to provide the intended outcome or the intended support of this particular funding. So the federal government tends to give us a very specific guidelines as to how and when we need to utilize those funds, just to make sure that they meet the specific requirements of the act itself. And the purpose of that for us, making sure that we cross all the T's and dot all the I's, is because we are held responsible on the audit. Because if we don't spend the money in accordance to the specific criteria of any federal grant, will be issue unaudit findings, and that is not good for any local jurisdictions. I can probably attest that as an overall. So that is really the technical question. I am not aware we're going to get a direct allocation from the USDA out of the $4 billion to the county. But if so, we have a process in place that we make sure that whatever money we get allocated from the federal government meets the intended outcome. And that is the commitment that we have.
Thank you. Mayor Ryder.
Yeah, as has been pointed out, we're not quite sure how that $4 billion is going to be distributed yet. We're still sort of waiting on a lot of the rules that are coming out of our American Rescue Plan. But first, all I want to say is, thank goodness that these dollars are now hopefully going to be available to our farmers in Thurston County. And we're gonna have to wait and see how that process is gonna play out. If it's gonna be a direct allocation. I haven't heard that yet either. So I imagine it's gonna go to the state, and the state is gonna probably set up some sort of grant program. And so we'll have to wait and see. Of course, on all these funds, it's always been my preference that local decision makers, the county commissioners in this case, have direct say on how those funds are being used instead of it going to the state instead. When the closer you can get to your community, the better chance you have on really seeing some good outcomes. It's unfortunately when you have these big federally run programs or even the state run programs, for it to be filtered down to hopefully the organizations that we know best here in Thurston County that can make the biggest difference. that it's always better if you have local decision makers as part of that process. And so we, through my role and then with the National League of Cities, who was really played a big partner in getting American Recovery Plan Act dollars passed. For a long time, they were saying no direct allocations to the counties or to the cities. So that was really this once in a lifetime opportunity for us to even have any direct allocation whatsoever. I'll continue to advocate for that, advocate for local control and decision-making processes when it comes to that, because as you can tell, we are putting processes in place to make sure our policies are looked at through a racial equity lens, as
15
Councilmember Cox
seconds.
for them. And so we'll just have to continue to advocate for that.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, Councilperson Cox, we'll start with you. How are you centering equity and community resources during COVID-19 and overall, as we have continued to see a lack of BIPOC households able to receive support with healthcare, especially mental health, food, and housing? We continue to see a gap in access and ability to receive adequate services. What will you do to address that gap? So again, how are you centering equity and community resources during COVID-19 and overall, as we have continued to see a lack of BIPOC households able to receive support with healthcare, especially mental health, food, and housing? As we continue to see a gap in access and ability to receive adequate services, what will you do to address that gap? Councilperson Cox.
Thank you. Well, we've just seen, as the mayor pointed out, an influx of the CARES dollars from Congress, and Lacey directed well over $250 million of those dollars into social services to help people who have lost jobs, who may have a job but they can't afford their living circumstance, any number of people. And we've partnered with various agencies, including the Community Action Council, programs for rental assistance. There's a homeless backpacks program as well. So essentially, we are trying to target everyone who has need. And I would like to say that, I would like to put a little bit more of a lens on racial equity within that. But my hope is that because people of color tend to have a disproportionate representation within the groups that would qualify for this aid, that we are indirectly helping them that way. I hope that answer made sense. I feel like I went around the mulberry bush there a little bit, but we're totally targeted on trying to help.
Thank you. County Manager Chavez.
Yeah, when we received the CARES money last year, we made sure that we allocated close to $2.5 million to United Way to assist with social services. In the new American Rescue Plan presented to the board a proposal that includes continue to support United Way. I will be proposing that, and also I introduced a proposal to set aside close to $3 million to support minority-owned businesses and enterprises. And that is an attempt to address some of the questions that you highlighted. But more importantly so, moving forward, we just issued a request for proposals. And the request for proposals is to start issuing grants to many of you on this screen, to many of the nonprofits related to services, housing services, rental assistance, homeless services, many aspects, we have close to $6.7 million that we're going to be awarding in grants. But what has happened since last year to this year? And this year in the request for proposals, we added points related to racial equity. And just to give you an example, we allocated points to, score the different applications between 20 points out of 100 or 120 points is a significant amount of 20% of those points. They're going to be evaluating the proposals they will have received from all the nonprofits, the majority of the nonprofits in this group, as to how they are going to help us to address racial equity through this allocation of funding. So, and the reason that I'm stating this, because I believe it's a partnership. And we as government are doing the best that we can, but also we need to make sure that nonprofits who gets allocated money, they need to be part of the solution moving forward. And this is an attempt as to how we have done that. So.
Thank you. Mayor Ryder?
Well, one thing that we know for sure is that COVID has really shown that the systems that we have in place haven't necessarily helped the people that needs help the most. And that is, I think, a big problem that we need to address going forward on any sort of decision making when it comes to how funds are distributed, which is, again, another reason why I am so optimistic that with our Commission on Equity, we're going to finally have a tool that we're going to be able to use to help the council make better decisions when it comes to our funding decisions. We were able to distribute quite a bit of money, as Councilmember Cox pointed out. I think we had our Lacey Household Assistance Program consisted of almost $800,000, which was available. And it went out for rental and mortgage assistance, utility assistance, childcare assistance. So we did receive a lot of dollars, and those dollars, in the most part, went to our nonprofits. And so, we have to hold our nonprofits accountable too, to making sure that they are doing their work on their end, to making sure their reach is going to people in need as well, and targeted people in need. Because again, you always have to be intentional on when it comes to this type of funding. Specifically, we saw that through our normal systems has failed so many people. With our like, for example, the PPP funding that went through, all that funding, I don't think went to necessarily the people who needed it the most either. And so we really need a whole systems change if we're gonna better target this money going forward. And we have to count on our nonprofit community to make sure they have good systems in place as well, and make sure their outreach is as targeted as we're hoping it to be.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
Well, let's see, support in healthcare. The answer for me is very simple. We need to hire more Black people. And I say that because, when the hospital has Black staff, or let's say, for example, when a Black staff person is involved in the birth of a child, the infant mortality rate is cut in half. Literally 50%. That child is more likely to survive when they have when they have BIPOC nurse and doctor present, statistically. When a student has one Black teacher, the likelihood that they'll go to college goes up 13%. When they have two Black teachers, it goes to 32%. So oftentimes our situation is simply addressed by I don't want to say the people that care for them, even though that seems to be a big portion of it. But also having role models to look up to seems to be a huge, big thing, even if it's unconscious, even if it's an infant. And so, being in some of those strategic places apparently seems to have a socioeconomic effect. And that's proven by the studies that I know about, that I've shared with, like, I think I shared with Thurston Thrives. I think I've shared with TRPC, some of the other places around, so they can get an understanding of equity, comes from, here's some services, here's some resources, but at the same time, a major
15
part of
seconds.
it, a major part of it is having someone to look up to that looks like you. There's no way to underscore that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the next question, County Manager Chavez, you'll be first. Those who are gaining a rental assistance subsidy, i.e. Section 8 for rapid rehousing, are having a hard time finding housing in the community due to application requirements and other barriers continuing to come up. Barriers are even higher for those who are people of color in our community. How are you acknowledging this and putting actions together to support people of color to secure permanent housing? So again, those who are getting rental assistance subsidy, like Section 8 or rapid rehousing, are having a hard time finding housing in the community due to application requirements and other barriers continuing to come up. Barriers are even higher for those who are people of color in our community. How are you acknowledging this and putting actions together to support people of color to secure permanent housing? County Manager Chavez.
Yeah, thank you. Let me begin by answering the question as to what we have done to address the impacts of COVID-19 on low income in the BIPOC community.
Oh,
We have allocated close to $18 million through the Community Action Council. And in fact, today we added that, and also through the Community Youth Services. They will help us to assist of those low income individuals, including the BIPOC community, to help us bridge the impacts of the COVID-19 in terms of rental assistance and utility assistance. And we also last year, we exercised just about the same amount, close to close to $6 million to that effort as well. And this was so important for the county to continue with this effort when the CARES money ended in December until the D money came. We needed to build a bridge to continue to support the most affected in our low income community. And we allocated close to $500,000 to continue with that process and build a bridge. So, but related to the housing, affordable housing, that is a big issue. That is a big issue for everyone involved in trying to find an affordable home. And more so for those individuals who don't even have the opportunity to reach out to the American dream in a way, parts of the BIPOC community. And one of the reasons, that's one of the main reasons to how we form at the regional level, the Regional Housing Council, to start building and start creating this project, creating this stock that actually is affordable to everyone. So there is a lot of pressure on the housing right now, as you can see all over the news, and we here in Thurston County. We just learned this morning the median house price in Thurston County is $435,000. The median house price. That is just unbelievable here in Thurston County. But it's all about the stock.
15 seconds.
It's all about the how many housing we can do. But I believe through the Regional Housing Council, we can make a difference.
Thank you. Mayor Ryder.
Well, thank you for the question. I really think that this is probably the biggest issue facing Thurston County immediately right now. We need about, at least, just to start off with, we need about 800 supportive housing units right now, for people who are forced to be living on our streets. And we haven't had a plan that could address this issue, from a monetarily standpoint, for a very long time. That's why the American Recovery Plan dollars, to me, is such a huge lifeline that we cannot screw up, in my opinion, when it comes to these direct allocation dollars, which is why I've been a big proponent for us to come up with a regional plan for the city of Lacey, Olympia, Thurston County, Tumwater, to not immediately go out and try to spend every single penny of these direct allocation dollars, but we need to hold on for a second. Let's see all the different rules and rulemaking that's going to come out when it comes to the American Recovery Plan Act dollars. And then let's look at a coordinated plan to actually build these units. And, I know, at least from the city of Lacey standpoint, we're willing to allocate a large portion of our dollars to this, if we can come up with a regional plan. And so I've been preaching this to the county, to other mayors, saying, let's turn this over to the Regional Housing Council, and in a very short period of time, let's at least look at the math and see what it will take. So that's just the supportive housing side of it. We also have to continue to incentivize building more affordable housing. The median income at $435 is so out of the reach of so many of us. It's crazy. And so, we have made some progress in the city of Lacey with our ADU program.
15 seconds.
And I think we need to do more of that affordable housing incentivization as well.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
Absolutely. I first want to, I 100% agree. We've got to incentivize, builders to build here. We don't have enough inventory for the people who are what we call, wealthy, even though they're not wealthy, but it takes two, 3 jobs to buy a house in this community. And when we have less inventory, it gets even tougher because they get bid up. I'm a loan officer, and I'm a residential mortgage loan officer. So I do mortgage loans all day, and I get to see, people win, people fail, what it takes to buy a piece of property in this county. We don't have enough inventory. And oftentimes people have got frustrated and decided they're going to move somewhere else. They leave the community because they're getting outbid. They're just unable to get, mutual acceptance on a piece of property in this county. I had one client who's like, forget it, I'm going to Georgia. At least I can buy a house there. And so, when those people leave, they take their disposable income with them, which our small businesses rely on to keep going. So we do need more housing here, and we need affordable housing. Another 3,500 square foot home isn't necessary. Yeah, I like them. They're nice. But people need smaller, affordable units that they don't have to work 3 jobs to have. Most of the smaller units, you can't even own them. You have to rent them. And then if you want to rent them, those prices are crazy too. I've had people go away and come back, go away and say, that's too expensive. Come back and say, oh my God, apartments are just as expensive as buying a house. I might as well just buy this house. And it happens every day here. And so, the barriers are there in part because we don't have enough to go around. And until we address that, we're going to continue to see this every time, every year, year after year. We're going to have the same issue. Last February, we had 258 houses on the market. That's a 3-day supply. The average county has 1,400 houses on the market at any given time, or what we call a 3.5-month supply. We're coming up short, and people consequently have to go buy somewhere else.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox?
I'm largely in agreement with what's been said so far. I think one thing we should talk a little bit about is Thurston County's homeless crisis response plan. Um, I don't have to preach to the choir here. I sit in meetings with so many of you from the social service agencies about how that gets hashed out. But the plan does provide key direction, literally to address the kinds of barriers that the question talks about to housing, as well as helping those without housing. Let me point to a piece of that plan. Objective 1, Strategy 5, racial equity in outreach best practices. Identify and develop best practices for outreach activities for Indigenous populations, people of color, and immigrants who are experiencing homelessness. And then Objective 2, prioritizing housing for people with the greatest need. So as Lacey's representative to the Regional Housing Council, I am very much driven by this document. And the city itself supports this document as well in the work that we do. So I think we've got a pretty good roadmap here in front of us if we'll just follow it. Thank you.
Thank you. So as a follow-up question to number 4, households experiencing homelessness and housing instability, especially BIPOC individuals, have been experiencing an increase in gatekeeping due to having rental assistance subsidy like Section 8 or rapid rehousing. Direct service staff in our community have supported households who have made contact with landlords and have documentation or verification requested of them that are outside of legal standards in the housing search process. This not only continues to create a narrative of repression, it also contributes to a narrative of needing white validation prior to moving forward with gaining housing, which is a basic human right. What are you going to do to continue to lower barriers for BIPOC members of our community to housing opportunities, especially after gaining a rental assistance subsidy or resource? So again, households experiencing homelessness and housing instability, especially BIPOC individuals, have been experiencing an increase in gatekeeping due to having rental assistance subsidy. Direct service staff in our community support households who have made contact with landlords and have documentation and verification requested of them that are outside of legal standards in the housing search process. This not only continues to create a narrative of repression, it also contributes to a narrative of needing white validation prior to moving forward with gaining housing, which is a basic human right. What are you going to do to continue to lower barriers for BIPOC members of our community to housing opportunities, especially after gaining a rental assistance subsidy or resource? County Manager Chavez.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned before the request for proposals. We requested applications from the nonprofits that we're going to be issuing $6.7 million or thereabouts, and which includes how we're going to be addressing the inequalities related to racial equity. We'll continue to approach this this program this way. This is the first year we have done it. We're going to see how the effects of that is, and if we continue in the future to make any adjustments, just to make sure that we address those needs the way you highlighted in your question. That is the obligation I believe we have when we distribute funds to address the specific needs of the BIPOC community. And housing insecurity is one of the biggest problems that we have. And this pandemic has put us even in a more difficult situation. As we heard, rents going up, housing stock is going down, the price of housing is going up as well, and that's what I believe we need to have the targeted approach. And I believe this is a small amount they're going to be issuing to some of the nonprofits in this meeting is how we're going to be reaching out to those in need the way you highlighted in your question.
Thank you. Mayor Ryder.
Well, I think, Councilmember Cox hit on this a little bit. We do have um, this, a plan in place right now, which is a Thurston County Homeless Crisis Response Plan. And within that plan, it basically lays out how you can measure success, and it starts with the compliance with the state and federal coordinated entry requirements for all the projects receiving federal, state, and local homeless funds. And so if people are out compliant on that, landlords are out compliant on that, that is a really big issue. But this really still comes down to, in my mind, the reason why this is becoming a bigger issue today in Thurston County is it comes back to not having enough supportive housing to begin with. And so when you're in a situation where you're having one opening and there's 9 applicants, where someone has received some money, but there's such a huge demand on that service, that's when they end up throwing more and more barriers on it. And so we just need more housing stock, more supportive housing stock in particular. A lot of the housing stock that is for Section 9 right now are also older homes that the landlords are willing to take Section 8 housing, but that the houses needs to be retrofitted because you end up spending more in your utility side than you are in saving rent. It's catch-22. So we definitely need specific programs to bring in more affordable housing, and also make the housing that we have right now more affordable to live in, and not just based on the voucher, but on the utility side as well.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
Oh, how do we stop people from discriminating in housing? Man, this is a question that's been around since what, the 60s? And somewhere in that ballpark. I think Stevie Wonder even wrote a song about it. And in fact, I know he wrote a song about it called Cash in Your Face. I agree with what the mayor was saying about, one person, one opening, 9 applicants, but it's oftentimes more like one opening, 20 applicants. And that allows you to, begin this process of adding barriers, or in other words, discriminating. And, if you are discriminating, you really need to be reported in that, especially if you're receiving funding. I know that those are supposed to be audited and they're supposed to be reviewed, and HMDA is supposed to, be filled out on each of those applications. But the police work on that is minimal, if any. And so yeah, we can petition and to have HMDA crack down on landlords to see what they're doing, but having a resource for the people to go to say, hey, I really feel like I was discriminated against, is also another investigative effort that takes full-time employee hours to complete and to make sure and to police it. So it seems to me that if you want to lower barriers, you're going to have to build more housing.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox?
Well, in addition to what everybody else said, I think a lot of work needs to be done to educate landlords about what they can do and what they can't do. And I'm really happy to see that the Thurston Thrives Thurston County Rental Housing Resources workshop is happening on the 21st. And it's going to get into just the very thing we're talking about here on rent assistance, eviction, resolution programs. That's going to be helped by the Dispute Resolution Center, and landlord mitigation programs. We'll have somebody from the State Department of Commerce working on that as well. You know, one of the, and I hate to pick on our congressional delegation, but federal regulations governing any kind of assistance funding are just so hard to deal with. They're so unapproachable. And we have to have professional grant writers. You practically have to be an attorney to read these regulations. And that's not going to change unless we can put pressure on Congress and on President Biden's cabinet members to start making changes that make that more accessible, make it easier, and make it, you know, make those regulations have a racial equity lens. I spent a little bit of time yesterday with our new Congresswoman, Marilyn Strickland, who was there to...
She's taking on an entire city. I'm making an Edinburgh cityscape for
Please
Okay,
mute yourselves. Thank you.
okay. Are we done time-wise?
Oh, no, you're good.
Oh, okay.
You have about 20 seconds.
Okay. She was here to help us do putting the final beam in place for the new transit administration and operations center. And she has already made considerable inroads into the BIPOC caucus within Congress. And I think she probably would be very, very receptive to talking with that. And Lacey has a little bit of an edge there because her offices are on the 3rd floor of our city hall. So we can see her fairly often. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, we'll start with you, Mayor Ryder. As leaders in the community, how are you ensuring that we are creating ways to accommodate folks who do not speak English or English is not their first language? As we know, accessing community services already places a lot of barriers on those that do not speak English, and COVID-19 has increased those barriers. What are ways you will help address this? So again, as leaders in the community, how are you ensuring that we are creating ways to accommodate folks who do not speak English or English is not their first language? As we know, accessing community services, excuse me, already places a lot of barriers on those that do not speak English, and COVID-19 has increased this barrier. What are ways you will help address this? Mayor Ryder.
Thank you. Well, you know, the city of Lacey is actually very mindful that important communications that are only based in English, you know, creates information gaps in access. So one of the things that we have started is a community process that's called Lacey Cares initiative. So we can hear from our residents and businesses and visitors on how we can help guide our future. And so to ensure that we have a broader participation from our community, communications about this effort include most frequently spoken languages at home, which in our cases is English, Spanish, Korean, Chinese, and Vietnamese. And so this is a big effort that we've put out to make sure that we're hearing from everyone. You know, I think past are the days where communications are only in English. At least it shouldn't be for local government anymore. And so we're also have updated our website, which includes our Google Translate to eliminate language barriers. And then we're also continue to identify major city documents that need to be translated as well. So this is an ongoing process for us. We also have translation services related to indigent defense, related to the criminal and justice system. So there's this ongoing effort, but we will definitely recognize it in the city of Lacey as a top priority, and we're taking steps to address it. And I'm sure I just took everyone else's from the city of Lacey's thunder there, but that's, you know, that's what we're doing in the city of Lacey, and and it is a priority for us all.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
I think he said it all. The only thing I think that I would add to that is schools, you know, and getting those communication homes to parents, because we covered this last year, and and I'm not sure that last year was the beginning of the time that we realized that we had a communication gap, but we certainly addressed it and made sure that, you know, all of our communications were pushed out in you know, multiple languages, especially the languages spoken most in the city of Lacey. And in county, you know, I was in a county meeting, and you know, there was a big push to make sure that, you know, kids taking home paperwork for their parents to review, read, respond to, were taking home paperwork in a language that their parents could understand if they were, you know, speaking a different language. Very critical for parents to you know, be able to understand what's going on with their kid at school. You know, and you don't think about this stuff, you know, until you have to think about this stuff. And so, you know, I did the Lacey Cares survey just to make sure that, you know, we didn't miss a step in getting it represented in all the different languages, and they were all there. We're very serious about making sure that our community understands what it is that they have access to, how to reach us, how to communicate with us, and so on, because we don't really want to leave anybody behind ever again.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox?
One of the concepts that I struggled with is the idea of people who have not had good access coming to us. I think we need to work more on taking services to them. That is not something that a city can do alone, obviously, or the county. I think we've worked really hard to develop partnerships with various organizations throughout our community. And I think we need to redouble those efforts to work with groups like Cielo and others to help us interface with non-English speaking portions of the community, and to help them understand that these resources are there for them. Because I mean, that's you know, you have to assume that A, they've got a computer, and B, that they know that that resource is available to them on the city's website. And those are two great big assumptions. And if they live in an area where they don't have good broadband service, even if they have the first two, the third might hamstring them as well. So I think it's going to take a big lift on everybody's part in order to not only to develop the resource, but to make sure that the information is out there, that it exists, and here's how to access it, and what can we do to help you get what you need to take care of whatever service that you're trying to acquire there.
Thank you. County Manager Chavez?
So the COVID-19 pandemic has really put in the forefront some of the barriers that we have to reach out to the non-English speaking members of our community. And it became pretty evident last year. So from our public health department, we reach out to those communities and partner with some local nonprofits to conduct testing, just to make sure that testing is available. And when it was time to reach out for vaccination, we partnered with some of the nonprofits, including Cielo, to have specific clinics to reach out to those members of that community. But even then, there was an attempt to reach out, to continue to reach out. And in fact, last week, Commissioner Mejia and I recorded a public service announcement related to COVID-19 vaccination in Spanish. And that was a videotape as well as a radio announcement that was going to be going out. And we continue to reach out to as many individuals that we can I myself participated in a couple of radio interviews last year with that radio station in Seattle, Spanish speaking. So we'll continue to explore. In terms of the regular business of the county, we have translators, and we make sure that we have available those translators for those individuals who needs it, both in the law and justice, whether it's a public defender or the courts, superior, district court, juvenile court, drug court, just to make sure that they have access to the translation services, make sure that we provide the services equally. We'll continue to explore options on other areas of the county, including just as simple as a road project, how we're going to be informing to those communities. So we are doing translation services and flyers to make sure that we reach out to many of those non-English speaking part of our community, members of our community. So we have done and will continue to do, but it's a lot of work yet to be done.
Thank you.
And
So
I
the
have
next question.
but I
Oh,
have
go
to
ahead.
leave in about 15 minutes, so I need
Okay.
to.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, Councilperson Miller, you'll start. There are many agencies, state, local, private, etc., that have stated that they support those who are undocumented. However, the reality that plays out is that you will need documentation, such as a social security card, in order to gain the supports with housing, food, medical, etc., creating a gap in applying for and gaining assistance. The existing structures create more barriers than accessibility. How would you change or add to the existing structure to create lower barriers and more accessibility? So again, there are many agencies that have stated they support those who are undocumented. However, the reality that plays out is that you will need documentation, such as social security card, in order to gain the supports with housing, food, medical, etc., creating a gap in applying for and gaining assistance. The existing structures create more barriers than accessibility. How would you change or add to the existing structure to create lower barriers and more accessibility? Councilperson Miller.
I don't know if I have the power to change somebody's structure of how they've structured their organization. I would like to see more clear, concise paths to citizenship for the people that want it, the people that are undocumented, in languages that they understand, and in very clear and simple terms on how to get it, as opposed to the many, many hoops that they have to jump through to try to become a citizen. The city of Lacey doesn't require, photo ID to gain some of its services. You can get utilities and these types of things without photo ID. And, there's some organizations locally like Interfaith Works who, that the same is also true. So if, just so I understand, your question right, how can we lower the barriers for people to get housing? Is that what you said?
Gain access to assistance when assistance requires documentation like a social security card.
Okay, but not all the assistance requires documentation. I know housing does, but I don't know how to say that there are many places that have assistance that you don't have to have a social security card to get, and they have access. But the question becomes, do they know they have access? And the answer seems to be apparently a lot of them don't. So how can we get that word out? How can we make sure that they know that, if you come here, you will have access to the things that you need? And I think that actually goes back to what we were just talking about before, pushing out your intent and your services and making sure that it's clear and legible in the languages that it's needed the most.
Thank you. Councilperson Cox?
You're muted.
Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I know that a lot of the people who are listening right now are already our partners in doing this, but it's going to take even more work on their part and in partnership with us to help people acquire the documentation that they need for services. We're already making some pretty good inroads, I think, into that. I think we can do more. And at the same time, kind of getting back to the federal government, you know, a lot of those barriers are created through the grant money that comes down through the federal government into the state and the county and ultimately the cities. And they come with rules and requirements. And so, excuse me, trying on one end to help people acquire the identification that they do need to access services, and on the other end, to work with the federal government to say, hey, you know, these rules are really creating issues and you're not being able to really serve the people who need it most because of the barriers you're implementing. You know, and you know, in fairness to the feds, they have to account for all of this money and how it's used. And it's a great deal of money when you start adding up all the programs out there. And let's not forget, these are all funded from the taxes that we pay. So there's a lot of pressure that way to do that.
Thank you. County Manager Chavez.
Just adding to what just has been stated, sometimes the color of the money or the source of the money dictates some of those requirements, and that it becomes difficult from the county's point of view to eliminate those requirements, because if we don't meet those requirements, we don't get the money. And as a result, we are not able to provide those programs to those in need. For those programs that we do have influence that does not record any type of documentation, we're committed to lower the barriers. As Council Member Cox stated, and it's a partnership with some of the service providers that we partner with, the nonprofits. And we continue to look for ways as to how we can lower the barriers for those individuals to access those services. But again, sometimes it is extremely complex when federal money, federal grants come, and they have what I call strings attached to that. And perhaps those strings attached include documentation that we're required to ask. So it's more of a structural conversation that we need to have that goes beyond the county government. Perhaps is more at a federal level as to how they can ease those requirements for us to provide better services. But, and again, I have to apologize, but I have to go.
Okay, thank you so much.
So,
okay, Mayor Ryder.
Yeah, I think I'm last on this. A lot of good stuff's been said already, and this really does come down to first of all, this is sort of the first time hearing that this has been a bigger issue coming from our nonprofits. You know, because as it's been pointed out, we're receiving federal dollars, especially the CARES Act dollars. And we've distributed to our nonprofits. In most case, I know that's what City of Lacey did. And so if there are barriers that are there, I'm sure then, you know, that needs to kind of back up the food chain so we can help address that. But this does come down to a lot of times the standards put on again by the federal government, and there's always this worry you always hear from the federal government of fraud and abuse. You know, sometimes I think those are just used to put barriers in place, and that is extremely unfortunate. And that's you always hear this fraud and abuse side of things, but really what we need to do is empower our nonprofits to be able to use that money to, you know, the best of their ability. They're the ones that are closest to the situation, and so when they're all these requirements coming down from the federal government on how they can be spent and the documentation needed, you know, that needs to be solved too. And you know, but as Councilmember Cox pointed out, those requirements are there for the protection of the taxpayer dollars. And so it's always a fine line between that, making sure that taxpayer dollar is protected and it's not going to places where it's not meant to go, or it's not supporting the people it needs to support, and making sure the barriers aren't too high, where things aren't into place where it doesn't get to the people it's intended to as well. And so this is an ongoing issue that with our federal government, and it is really hard to use some of these federal funds sometimes, and we just need to get better at
15 seconds.
understanding that balance there.
Thank you. Okay, question number 7, and Councilperson Cox, it will start with you. So while supporting BIPOC communities during COVID-19, staff in the nonprofit sector have observed COVID-based emergency relief aids continue to request documentation in order to apply and access assistance. This is also true for other critical resources and services that are not specific to COVID. This can create a barrier to those who have never applied for support, those at risk of being homeless or experiencing homelessness, the very population that would need these types of assistance who also at times lack specific documentation that's being requested. What can be done to lessen the barriers in order for communities to easily apply and access resources? So again, while supporting BIPOC communities during COVID-19, staff in the nonprofit sector have observed COVID-based emergency relief aid continue to request documentation in order to apply and access assistance. This is also true for other critical resources and services that are not specific to COVID. This creates a barrier to those who have never applied for support, those at risk of being homeless or experiencing homelessness, the very population that would need these types of assistance who also, at times, lack specific documentation that's being requested. What can be done to lessen the barriers in order for communities to easily apply and access resources? Councilperson Cox.
Thank you. Well, I think my answer may be shorter than that question, but, because it covers a lot of the ground that we just covered on question 6. But Lacey's experience with COVID, when this thing hit, we moved really, really fast. We took $1 million out of our reserve account. We went to work with the Thurston Economic Development Council to set up a grant program where local businesses, including those operated by people of color, could apply for up to $10,000 to help them do things like meet their payroll, keep people employed, do what we could to give them a cushion to get through this. At the same time, we also, as has been mentioned previously, diverted a large chunk of funding for social services. A lot of it went through United Way and the Community Action Council to provide rental assistance, childcare, any number of other supports that people need. To move something that fast, a lot of barriers had to come down. And I'm just I've really kept a close ear to the ground on this, and I just have not heard complaints on the Lacey end of things about problems with BIPOC people running into issues accessing the services that this money was paying for.
Thank you.
Not that, I can add a little bit to it. When you're dealing with a health crisis, a financial crisis, and at the same time, we were also and still are dealing with civil unrest. And a lot of stuff gets slung, a lot of stuff gets said, but
15 seconds.
I really think we responded pretty well in the moment. We can obviously do better, but I think everybody's heart was in the right place and we did the best we could.
Thank you. Mayor Ryder.
Yeah, I think I answered a lot of this on my last question. again, if I haven't been made aware of some of the barriers that are apparently coming out from our nonprofit community. First of all, that communication line needs to change if that's what's going on. You know, the city of Lacey is for sure wants to make sure that this is a priority, and if there's barriers in place and then there's something that we can do about, then we need to work together and do that. And I appreciate this forum where you can hear from us, right, on what we're doing, but what we really need is a two-way communication going forward. We need to be able to work together on these issues and come up with solutions together, because distributing money to nonprofits is just one step, right? If there are barriers in place and the nonprofits aren't able to access that money or able to get to the people in need because of issues or standards, then we need to hear about that, and so we can address it. You know, hearing about in a question is the last place I should be hearing about it. I should be hearing about it, you know, well ahead of time, so we can address this going forward. And so that's my hope, is that this will be a two-way dialogue going forward, because we do need to hear about what barriers exist and what we can do together to help change it. Because we all need to be on the same page, rowing in the same direction in this play, you know, when it comes to this. And COVID exposed a lot of issues, some long-standing issues, and so we need to address that by working together. And I know the city of Lacey is committed to doing better, and hopefully the nonprofit world is as well. And then we just need to keep that dialogue open and going.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
Yeah. So I keep hearing, you know, how can I get resources without, you know, proving who I am? And since we live in a place where oftentimes you have to prove something to get research, you know, when we have dollars to hand out, they're always attached to some long page of hurdles that we have to hop over to just to give them away. And so, you know, if I guess the question becomes, you know, is there anything out there? Is there anything that nonprofits are doing to help these people get some ID? You know, is there a program available like, hey, you can get a license, maybe not a driver's license, but a photo ID card or something that's going to help you to clear some of these hurdles, because they seem to be everywhere. And so, you know, I understand that, you know, I'm definitely down to help people and want to provide some resources and go out to the camps and hand out stuff that I have available, clean out my cupboard and put it in the back of my Jeep and go hand stuff out. I do it because, you know, I definitely have compassion and care for the people who are out there struggling because of a lot of them, no fault of their own. They got priced out of their apartment or whatever the case may be. I've taken several guys out to lunch and asked them, why are you homeless? And he's like, man, I just couldn't afford it anymore. And so, you know, there has to be something in place since we understand and know that these hurdles exist. I can't get services without documentation, and in a lot of cases you can. But what are we doing? What's the nonprofit community doing to help these people get some kind of documentation that's going to help them get some of the services? You know, I'd like to be a part of that conversation and be on board with that, because I would pour my own resources into something like that.
Thank you. And the follow-up question for question number 7. Why are local providers requiring documentation outside of the legal framework from the state? So again, why are local providers requiring documentation outside of the legal framework from the state? Councilperson Cox?
Well, I was not aware that that was happening. I think once again, this is a situation that's calling for education, that I think we could use the help from everybody who's taking part in this call to make sure that people know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and we go from there. I mean, if a provider isn't aware of the rules and requirements, then that's on us. And by us, I mean all of us. You know, I think the city could possibly have some role in that, but I think it's the greater social services community that, you know, we give you guys money to provide these services. I think it's incumbent on all of us.
Thank you. Mayor Ryder?
Yeah, my question would be, why are they receiving? This is I have not heard this either. You know, and if that's happening, you know, it'd be nice if we were made aware of that so we could help where needed. Again, now it's too late, right? I mean, if we've gone through a lot of this process of now I'm hearing that there's requiring other documentation that's not late. I mean, it's way too late in the process for us just to be hearing about this now. So again, I will urge, we need to have a more of an open dialogue and create opportunities and spaces where we can hear about these issues. It shouldn't be on a situation where you're asking me. I should be asking you, you know, what's going on here, because I'm just now hearing about it, and it's way too late in the process for the city council, or as you know, as the mayor of Lacey, to be able to step in and help that process out. So again, another good reminder that we need to be communicating better than a one-way dialogue in a situation like this.
Thank you. Councilperson Miller?
And just so I'm clear, when you say providers, who are you talking about?
Well, the question before talked about agencies like state, local, private, etc. The questions I received didn't specify in this specific situation who the local level providers are they're referring to.
Oh, okay. Because when you said providers, I immediately thought hospitals and care clinics, because that's what I think when I hear the word providers. If that's who you're talking about, then I would say, because, you know, without insurance, you're not getting any, you may not get any help. Even if there's a clinic that, you know, like CMAR, where you don't have to have insurance per se, you know, they always have the fear of not receiving, you know, pay for their services, and having to use a full-time hour employees to, you know, walk that thing all the way through the process, potentially get some kind of reimbursement or writing it off. If you're talking about nonprofits and the services that they supply to people, I understand that they try to be low barrier, but they're working off grants. And if you know anything about grants, you know that when you're working off of them, you have to have a paper trail that's immaculate. And if you don't, then you may not get another grant. So, but if they are overstepping their bounds and asking for stuff that is not required of their grant or not required of their mandate, then you're the first person to bring it to us. And if it keeps coming, and you know, and you guys bring it to us at council or TRPC or Thurston Thrives, then, you know, we can collectively do something about it. But I didn't, you know, my wife works at CYS. I have not heard her say this either. So I'm trying to understand where it's coming from. But if it's something that needs to be dealt with, absolutely, we would do it as a group.
Thank you. So I've shared, well, obviously people are attending that are hearing the feedback, but also we're checking on clarification on that as well. So we'll forward that to you with the organizations who put together the questions. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Both today's forum and the forum from March 24th have been recorded. The recordings will be available on the